This is Steve Brule with Studio Brule, and I'm live here with the Liberty Bells, two of the Liberty Bells, Catherine and Elizabeth, and we're here to discuss some more of the sometimes crazy stuff going on in London, England, and in England in general. So welcome, folks. And Elizabeth, do you want to start us off here? What's been on your mind?
Yeah, actually, I was planning on starting off in Texas, I believe, is my location for the first story, actually. With a story about a band called Dream Machine, who have just released an album called The Illusion, and shortly after were dropped by their record label Castleface after an interview with a French site called Still in Rock. So Castleface have said that Castleface does not agree with the statements on ICE, which is Immigration and Customs Enforcement, immigration, feminism, and sexual assault. Peace, love, and respect to all humans, refugees, and victims of violence. We're horrified and ashamed by this. As you can imagine, I was absolutely, keen to find out what terrible, terrible things they'd said, and actually reasonable and simply not far left. As far as is concerned, the wife, there's a husband and wife team in the band, and the wife has just immigrated to America from Bosnia. And so she was talking about how she had a really difficult time immigrating legally, and that it's not fair that illegal immigrants get lots of money handed out to them and a free pass into America when she's had to work really hard. And she said that she's glad that ICE are now doing their job deporting these criminal illegal aliens. They've criticised safe spaces and also talked about feminist rock bands who sing about sexual assault and think it makes them really radical and how shit it is. They're my new favourite band, and I urge everyone to go out and buy their record to support them. They're not on Twitter or Facebook, unfortunately. Some props that way, but there are some email addresses on their website.
Is this the band that says they're moving to Europe? Did you mention that? Or yeah.
Because American musicians are getting increasingly politically correct, and it started getting on our nerves. So they're hoping for something better in Europe, and I don't know if they're going to find it, to be honest.
Yeah,
I'll certainly
that's a good question. Go ahead, Catherine.
Did we talk about Glastonbury last time? No.
No.
So I was just saying they might not enjoy Europe if they were to perform at Glastonbury, because this is a very big music festival which has expensive tickets, so it does tend to be a lot of very middle class educated kids that are actually there. But Jeremy Corbyn, on that day, he declined an invitation to attend any sort of, it was Armed Forces Day, and he declined any kind of participation in any of those Armed Forces Day events so that he could speak on the main stage at the Glastonbury Festival. The pyramid stage, and they were chanting Jeremy Corbyn, and it just made me chuckle, because being very young, very drunk, possibly very high, probably doesn't qualify you to make your political decisions. But yeah, it was just funny. So yeah,
there was a beautiful moment in his speech where he told everybody to look over there and look at that wall. On that wall, there's a message for Donald Trump, and it says, "Build bridges, not walls," on the wall.
And this wall will stop people who didn't have tickets coming into the festival, which is extremely stupid.
There's not much consistency.
He was completely oblivious to the irony.
Yeah, just no awareness whatsoever of the irony.
Yeah.
And the hypocrisy. So what's new?
They also they've
like,
a load of articles.
You mentioned the irony issue. like that. I think we talked about earlier the group of boys who wore skirts. Can you talk about that one, Catherine?
Sorry. One more thing about Jeremy Corbyn's speech at Glastonbury. So part of his speech was, we need to remember all the freedom fighters and how important rights were, and how at the time of the First World War, how many women died so that they could vote.
Was there one?
Well, there was one.
Well, there was one, but she kind of arguably killed herself. So, but it's just like,
I guess in today's analysis, one dead woman equals millions of dead men on the battlefield, right?
Literally, like, could there be a more 1984 war is peace, black is white, day is night, wrong interpretation of reality? But these kids in the audience, thousands of them, they cheered that. Oh, it was just this moment of, oh my God, we are all just in there. So yeah.
It's crazy. Catherine, carry on from there with the protest of the boys at the end.
Oh yeah, so these boys, it was like the hottest week of the year in the UK, and these boys weren't allowed to wear shorts to school. So they turned up wearing skirts, and they said it was unfair because the girls were allowed to wear skirts and they weren't allowed to wear shorts. And yeah, obviously that's great. But yeah, the way it struck me was just all the feminists on my Facebook were like, yeah, these boys have acknowledged that gender is not a thing and they can wear skirts. And like, no.
They didn't get it at all, right? Just
yeah.
I don't know. That's a weird one.
Yeah, that was.
But props to the boys. That was very creative, and it sent quite the message that, of course, an anti-feminist message, really.
But I think the good thing is that I think everyone agreed that, like, it was great that the boys wore skirts and it was a fun thing to do, and of course they should be allowed to wear shorts if the weather's hot, and they should have the same rights. I think we all agreed on that. So
yeah.
That's a good thing.
Yeah, it seems like, because there was a mum quoted in one of the newspaper articles about it, and she said she'd called up and asked if the boys could wear shorts because it's not on the official uniform. And she said she was shot down. But also in the article were quotes from the headmistress, who seems to be reappraising that decision quite seriously.
Well, it's great because it's an international incident, right? Like, it's comical, of course.
Yeah.
Makes a very, very strong point of that.
And there were good photos.
Hey?
There were good photos.
Oh, good photos. Yes, definitely. What else we got on the list here?
And are they NRA?
Sorry?
Should we look at the Jewish school next?
The Jewish school. Which one is that?
Yeah, the Jewish school that's facing closure.
Oh, yes, yeah.
The Vishnitz Girls' School in North London that teaches children aged 5 to 8 and is praised for the quality of its education in many areas, has failed its Ofsted inspection. That's the Office for Standards in Education, Children's Services and Schools, for the third time since February 2016, as it fails to give pupils a full understanding of fundamental British values, i.e., 5 to 8 are not taught explicitly about issues such as sexual orientation. The Equality Act 2010 lays out the requirement to teach about the protected characteristics, including sexual orientation and gender reassignment. So the school is now facing closure by the Department for Education for not indoctrinating its children.
And we're talking
its young children.
Under nines?
5 to 8 years old, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yep, there are words for this.
Although on the flip side, Joanna Williams, who is she runs Spiked Online, which speaks out about a lot of this kind of social justice infiltration, particularly of they publish the University Free Speech Guide, so they're quite an important website. She was quoted in the national media. I think she did get attention in most major newspapers, and she was just talking about how teaching all of this gender theory to primary school age children, what a waste of money it is, what a waste of time it is, how it's just kind of confusing the children and how pointless it is. And I think she did get quite a bit of support, and she did get quite a bit of coverage on that. Although I guess just because most normal people would probably agree with her doesn't mean that the policy is going to change.
Yeah, it's still in law.
Yeah.
What do you think about that couple who named their baby boy Vagina? Any comments on that?
I think very highly of them personally. I think, yeah, it's just completely, it just takes me back to A Boy Called Sue by Johnny Cash.
Yeah.
And this kid is going to grow up to be the toughest.
The toughest. Out of necessity, right?
Out of necessity, exactly. Verging on abusive to call your child vagina, boy or girl,
Really,
surely.
yeah. But it also highlights that no one would call their little girl penis, now would they?
Or knob.
In this
You
community.
could call your daughter knob.
Knob. But these abuses tend to be directed at the baby boys, not at the baby girls.
Now, what country was this in?
Let me just look it up here.
Because I know in the UK, if you go and try and name your kid something really stupid, like if you go and say, I name my child like table or chair, they can actually say to you, no, you can't do that.
Can they?
I think so. Certainly when I was a kid, I know, like people in like the 70s and the 80s, people in the UK got turned away if they were trying to name their kid something completely stupid or like offensive, like trying to name your kid Hitler or something. You can't do that. Probably quite rightly.
Let me just call this up here.
Or maybe he'll find a really good nickname, like Vag.
Yeah.
I don't think you can rescue that name for a boy, no matter what you do. Okay, I'm just putting it in the watch channel here. Let me put it in the chat, the link to the article here on the boy named Vagina. Here we go.
Oh.
I love the title. Woman stood up to gender norms
What?
by naming her son Vagina. She stood up to gender norms.
That boy was
This
gorgeous.
is the thing. It seems to me that all of these abuses of babies are abuses of baby boys. And in Canada, there's a couple, or it's a transgender woman, man, whichever. It's a woman with a woman had a baby, calls herself a man now. She's transgender, whatever. She refuses to allow the official agencies to put the gender on, like birth certificate, blah, 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 all that other stuff. She's fighting it in court so that there's no record of this baby's gender until she says the child tells her what her gender is, or his gender. It's a baby boy, as far as I understand.
There's another story that it's this lesbian couple, and they've got a 2-year-old boy, and they've decided that he's trans or something.
Yeah, I seem to
Right.
recall something along those lines. Yeah.
Yeah, it's
So let me get this straight. He lives with 2 women, and he started to kind of pick up feminine traits.
I don't know. I think it's from quite a while ago, but deciding that your toddler is trans.
At 2?
I mean, my son thinks he's an ice cream. My toddler thinks he's an ice cream. Should I go and turn him into an ice cream?
Right. Or they'll be dinosaurs or wolves or whatever they want to be for a long, long time.
Yeah, but you kind of can do that now. You can do that in Canada, can't you? Haven't they got otherkins listed as like...
I don't know the full extent of it here. I know we're pretty far advanced along that line.
To be fair, it sounds like Canada is pretty far advanced in like all the worst stuff right now.
Yeah. It's now, I believe, the bill. I can't remember the number of it, but it is law now that. Sorry.
C16?
C16, that sounds right. But it is passed that it's officially illegal to discriminate, and they list out all these things based on gender. And of course, gender today is just about anything you want it to be, including, like you said, otherkin. There are people that identify as vampires, as wolves, I don't know, as bouncing baby bunny
what was
thingies.
scary, if you can watch the testimony of Jordan Peterson, Theron Mayer, and Gad Saad, and also another gentleman lawyer testified again in the Canadian, I don't know what it was, the Senate or whatever it was, on the topic of this bill. And they were saying, look, this would actually, Gad Saad was saying, this would stop me from teaching what I teach. It would stop me from teaching that humans are a sexually dimorphic species. And Jordan Peterson was saying this would stop me from, like, I don't want to be forced to use these pronouns that I don't believe exist. It's enforced speech. It's not just free speech. It's forcing people to say something. And these people, the panel they were speaking in front of, were saying things like, but these rules stop genocide. Are you telling me you don't want to protect trans people from a genocide?
How I've never seen any evidence that that transgender people are under any kind of threat here, of any kind.
I mean, you know, from what I've heard, is a lot of trans people saying that the sort of extremists are causing problems for them because they're creating this conflict. And actually, you know, most trans people just want to be known by the other pronoun, and it's all quite simple, and they can get on with their lives quite quietly and peacefully, and that's what they want. They don't want to start trying to control people's speech and making them say completely made up nonsense.
Yeah, and also in Canada, they're about to pass certain legal reforms to the rape shield stuff that effectively all the evidence that showed that Ghomeshi was, well, that showed that the women were lying and colluded against Ghomeshi, it would exclude or potentially exclude all of that evidence. And I think that's like from the high orders of mighty Trudeau himself.
Yep, that is in the courts. Sorry, that's in the legislature now. I don't think that's passed.
I think it's very likely to.
It's, as far as I understand, it's stalled in the Senate right now. So it's not dead. It's just not moving forward at the moment. But, you know, we are a feminist country. I would say if I had to bet, I'll bet this will go through. So
what a horrifying thought.
So anything that happens after the fact, texts, emails, any kind of behavior, they're going to have to submit it all, and it's at the discretion of the judge whether or not.
Well, there was some. We did I think we just published a Flamengo file on this exact topic last Thursday. So and it's dealt with pretty detailed in there. There's a lawyer who's president of the Alberta Law Society who commented on this quite strongly, saying that under this law, Ghomeshi would have been found guilty. Yeah. Now, this law was also proposed because, and after the Ghomeshi thing, and it references the Ghomeshi trial. And if you remember, the Ghomeshi trial showed all kinds of feminists protesting out there saying, we know he's guilty. Mm-hmm. I'll tell you this. If Ghomeshi had been living on the top of Mount Everest for 35 years, never having known those women, they would have still said, we know he's guilty. You know, they just want blood. They want to see a man suffer because a woman made a claim. That's it. As soon as a woman, these feminists believe that if a woman makes a claim against a man, the man must suffer, no matter what. Evidence doesn't matter.
What's crazy about that trial is from that, you'd expect it to kind of just expose all of the awfulness of it. But what it's actually done with this new legislation, it didn't go well for these women who were lying and colluding. And what it's actually done is, okay, we'll pass new legislation so that will be a for you next time. I mean, it's crazy.
Yeah. It's pretty clear that they want immunity from being caught in their lies. It's a power grab. It's a power grab to give, and along the direction of the feminists want, of course, is absolute power over men. I think that's ultimately the goal of feminism.
I think something similar happened. Was it in Israel? They passed something similar, and I think they did eventually revoke it because they realized how it could be abused. So yeah, I guess
it's disappointing to me that we have legislators and elected officials that can't see their way through this crap, and they're representing us by creating new laws. That's one of the scarier parts of the whole thing.
Yeah, well, it's the same in the UK with our new thing coming in September, where alleged victims won't have to give evidence at trial. They can pre-record their evidence and avoid ever being questioned on it. And, you know, the whole legal establishment were up in arms and said this is an absolute, you know, rejection of due process, and it's going to lead to people being imprisoned on false claims. And the government have said, no, we're going ahead with it. Forget about it.
So that passed?
Yeah.
Oh, geez. I hadn't heard that it passed. I heard it was proposed, and I was thinking, you know, probably that one won't go through. It's crazy. There's just no other word for it. Craziness.
But there's one story I do want to talk about. I'll just pop it into the chat. So I think it's really important, slight subject change, but in there was this Australian initiative. It was a public sector initiative to start hiring in a gender-blind way, so you would take off the name of the job applicant. And what they actually found was that it was actually making women less likely to get the job. And of course, because these people, their view of the world is, of course, it's all sexist against women. They just went into it expecting it to be better, you know, to make women's chances better of getting hired. And of course, what they did was they stopped the program immediately, even though it was technically a fairer system. But I think to me, it's a really important piece of evidence, because when you're having these conversations with people about whether or not women are discriminated against in the workplace, one of the first arguments they use is, oh, but if you put a man's name on the same CV, he's much more likely to get the job. And actually, well, I'm sure maybe that's true in certain circumstances for certain companies in certain cases, but it's really not true.
This is the second example of this, because again, in a Flamengo file a little while ago, we put up this study that showed that universities hiring for faculty positions favor female over male applicants 2 to 1.
Of course they do. Of course they do. And it's like these people are literally living in a parallel universe. They really think they're living in a parallel universe. And of course, they've gone off and done all this research, which of course was probably possibly done a very long time ago, or also possibly the fact that people wanted to get certain results. Maybe, you know, they knew what factors they could kind of meddle with to get the
feminist is involved in research, you can almost guarantee that it lies.
That's the point. And of course, there are going to be some scenarios where men come out of it better than women, because gender is a variable, and there are going to be other variables, different sectors, different ages, different roles, different, of course. But I think it's really, really important to have you know, examples like this to say, no, actually, just because every time people are opening a newspaper, they're told that women are discriminated against, does not mean that that is reality. And it actually means the opposite. People are falling over themselves to hire women. And I did used to work in a tech company, and they were falling over themselves to hire me. And every time a woman came in for an interview, everyone was really excited and really rooting for her to get the job. And I mean, that was one of the reasons I got so involved in Gamergate, was because it's like, no, I worked in an office full of game developers. What you're talking about is a load of rubbish. So.
Yeah. That was what I saw throughout my 22 years in the chemical industry as well. The universities would graduate approximately 20 males for every female out of chemistry and chemical engineering, and yet the hiring was 50-50. And it because it was necessary by law. The affirmative action programs came in 1984. And by the way, the history of affirmative action is quite interesting. They hired one woman with the goal to go out there and help them support creating laws for affirmative action. And of course, her study came back, and that was the only study they used to push the laws through. And here we have it. So for the entire 22 years I was there, you saw if it was basically like this: if the woman wanted the job or the promotion, she got it. If no woman wanted the job or promotion, a man has a chance at it.
Yay!
That's what we call equality. So of course, men tended to end up with the harder, dirtier, less desirable jobs, in my view. Okay, so we're at we've got like just a couple minutes to go, and I know Catherine has to go very soon. There was something else you wanted to talk about, Turkish boys.
Oh yeah, so the Daily Mail ran this article, and it showed pictures of these like 6-year-old boys being held down and circumcised in Turkey, and like some of them, like they were holding lollipops. They'd been given a lollipop to sorry, this is just so upsetting and so horrible. And it just made me so angry, because, you know, whenever you go to, I don't know, the World Health Organization, they say, you know, FGM is a sign of one of how the world discriminates against women. And it's like across so many countries in this world, boys that are much older than, you know, we in the West, we think of it as babies that have this done to them, which is bad enough. But this happens to boys who are much, much older. But of course, they're not big, you know, they're not, they say that it's about becoming a man. A 6-year-old is not becoming a man.
That's exactly what they say about FGM too.
But you know what? If you want to take an 18-year-old of whatever gender, and they decide for themselves that's what they want to do to become a man or a woman, and they go off and they stand there and they let you do that to them, that's their business. But like pick on someone your own size. If they're becoming a man, then why do you need to bribe them with a lollipop and hold them down while they're screaming? It's disgusting. It doesn't make them a man. It makes them a victim of abuse. And it just made me so angry that this happens to little boys. So I'm the mother of a boy. I'm expecting another boy. And one of the boys in the pictures looked exactly like my son. And nobody cares. Mm-hmm. Nobody cares. Nobody. All they want to do is minimize the severity of what's happening to boys and the pain that they go through, and say, oh, it's so much worse when it happens to girls, as if a child being strapped down and having parts cut off from their body with no anesthetic, as if there's any way to make that better or worse than what it actually is. So yeah, that just made me want to punch someone.
I wouldn't blame you for following through on that. Yeah. You know, it reminds me, years ago, there was a case of, and I think even, is it the World Health Organization condoned circumcision because they say it helps to reduce the spread of HIV in women. Okay? Mm-hmm. So in other words, it's okay. They're almost saying and acknowledging that it's a bad thing as MGM, but because it helps women, it's okay to mutilate the boys. And there was an example. Just want to fill this one point off. There was an example of a villager guy who the whole village pursued him, and he was like, I think he was in his 20s or even 30s. The whole village pursued him, held him down in public. Women and men were laughing at him while they went down there and hacked off the end. And
yeah, I saw that.
No global outrage, not a word. It was mostly just a sign, as an event for humor. This guy was mobbed and then mutilated while being laughed at, and even around the world, the sentiment is humor.
Well, even this Daily Mail article that I was talking about had a joke in the title was, "This might sting a bit," but I mean, at least they were drawing attention to this horrible, horrible thing. But you would not be able to make a joke like that if the article were about girls. So yeah, sometimes I think, why do I do this? What's the point? And then I get reminded of yeah, just how much people need to speak out about this stuff.
Well, thanks for bringing that one up, Catherine. And I know you have to go.
Sorry, Elizabeth, please don't. Please.
Sorry?
Elizabeth, please.
I was just going to say, as far as the World Health Organization guidelines go, and you know how they say that it reduces the spread of AIDS, I saw another study. FGM actually reduces the spread of AIDS. FGM.
And so that is debatable. That it's a debate that whether that's a correlation or a causation, because the communities that are more likely to circumcise are more likely, perhaps less likely to be sexually promiscuous. So
yeah,
even that, and even if it does reduce the risk, so say if it reduces the risk 10%, does that make it okay to go and have unprotected sex with hundreds of people? It's ridiculous.
Exactly. There's a guy on YouTube who's got a video, and he says in it, you know, you've got two choices: either you wear a condom every time, or you get mutilated and wear a condom every time.
Yeah, that's ridiculous. Yeah.
No, this got to carry on the good fight there, Catherine.
Well, Elizabeth is much more knowledgeable about the whole male genital mutilation thing than I am, so Elizabeth needs to carry on her good work.
Of course. we won't carry on without Elizabeth, right? So, Elizabeth, it's just past 9:30 now. You're welcome to stay with us, Catherine. I think you mentioned you needed to go.
Happy Martin.
Yes. And folks, we'll probably be moving to a later time slot next week, so keep notice. We'll tweet about that. Yeah, come back to us next week, and hopefully we'll have more of the Liberty Bells as well, as two couldn't join us today. Elizabeth, if you want to carry on and talk about one more item before we sign off after Catherine goes, and then see you, Catherine.
I would like to mention the domestic violence, or the domestic violence and abuse bill, I think it's going to be called, because last week Mark Brooks of the Men and Boys Coalition put out a very kind of hopeful article about how it was a great opportunity to get male victims recognised. And he has said that it was particularly encouraging to hear the beginning of a shift in the government's narrative on domestic abuse, from one that has focused overwhelmingly on female victims in heterosexual relationships to a more inclusive, equality-based narrative that gives equal importance and concern to victims regardless of their gender. And all of that is based on a little snippet from the briefing notes from the Queen's speech, where it says that the 2015 to 16 crime survey for England and Wales indicates that 7.7% of women and 4.4% of men reported having experienced any type of domestic abuse in the last year. So I kind of was interested by this and hopeful, like Mark, and so I kind of dug a little bit deeper. And I mean, the briefing doc itself also says that the bill will enable the government to establish a new domestic violence and abuse commissioner to stand up for victims and survivors, raise public awareness, monitor the response of statutory agencies and local authorities, and hold the justice system to account in tackling domestic abuse, which was interesting in itself, that last bit, that they want this commissioner to hold the justice system to account, because while those rates of domestic abuse that were reported are the lowest level since the survey began, the prosecutions are actually the highest ever. So it seems like they're doing a pretty excellent job. But I also wonder who this commission is going to be. It doesn't say whether they're going to be a member of the public or from the government, if they're going to be elected or appointed. And, you know, obviously my concern is that they're going to be a feminist, and I think that's pretty likely.
Yeah. And of course, if that's the case, then you can predict the priorities.
Absolutely. And so I also looked at the government press release on this, and they've said that the programme of work will look at what more can be done. Experts in this area will be invited to contribute ideas and proposals for improving the way the system works, which is likely to lead to legislation. So who are those experts going to be? I mean, you know, most of our shelters are run by feminists.
Of course.
The Prime Minister will also ask for any potential quick wins in the intervening period to be identified and acted upon. The Prime Minister will directly oversee this work. And then Theresa May, Prime Minister, has said, I am clear on the measures I introduced as Home Secretary, including the new offence of controlling and coercive behaviour, domestic violence protection orders and domestic violence disclosure scheme, and ensure that no stone will be left unturned in delivering a system that increases convictions. So, I mean, I think that's a red flag for me. He's going to leave no stone unturned in increasing convictions, not in bringing down the rate of domestic violence, but in increasing convictions. And I looked into the controlling and coercive behaviour bill. I looked into all of the bills, you know, and the domestic violence protection orders basically allow the police to tell somebody that they have to be away from, you know, they've got to leave the house for 28 days before they have to bring a charge. So that's supposed to stop, you know, the abuse continuing while the investigation's going on. And then the domestic violence disclosure scheme is one where the police and ask if their partner has ever been accused or convicted of domestic violence. And actually, if the police are really concerned, they can call up people and, you know, cold call them and say, hey, your partner, did you know about this? But as far as the controlling and coercive behaviour order, things like, while all legislation is gender neutral and men can also be the victims of this offence, controlling or coercive behaviour is primarily a form of violence against women and girls and is underpinned by gender inequality. It is therefore important to consider the role of gender in the context of power and control within a relationship when identifying controlling or coercive behaviour in heterosexual relationships.
This just
so you know,
this is disheartening to me because in my view, in my experience, women are more coercive and controlling in relationships than men are. They just have different ways of going about it.
I've seen studies that say the same thing. You know, and it's like
yet they're absolutely denying it.
It's a bit of a kick in the teeth when they start off by saying, "Oh, all the legislation's gender neutral, and men can also be victims." Like, oh, but they're always perpetrators, basically.
Yeah.
And you know, so this is what the guidelines say.
Is this law now, or is this a proposed law, or this is like policy, or what is this stage?
No, that is law. Yeah.
Okay, you got to start telling men in the UK, just don't ever live with a woman. It's too dangerous. Like this law gives them the right to mark you for life as a perpetrator just because you've been charged, or even there's an accusation or a suspicion. Then it also gets you kicked out of any house you live in, or even if you own it, for 28 days. And after that, you'll never get back in. So listen, UK men out there, keep your own place. Have a girlfriend if you like, if you have that level of risk taking in you. but don't live with a woman, period. Don't do it. The law will kill you. And even if the law doesn't get you, the power dynamic of living with a woman under a situation where the law gives her that power means that within the relationship, you cannot have a relationship with equals while living with her. She can always destroy your life, and you will never be able to get away from that reality. That's what I think. Is it too extreme?
Yeah, all bad
you think,
news.
Elizabeth?
We should have ended with the Academy story for a bit of a light note.
Just to comment on what I'm suggesting there, you think that's too extreme of a response, or what?
You know, I mean, I kind of look at it like, you know, they say the divorce rate is 50%, which is terrible, but then on the other hand, that still leaves half of all marriages succeeding. And so, you know, if you're a really good judge of character,
but I've heard this a lot, this kind of argument, but that doesn't mean that those, quote, successful marriages are any good for the man. A lot of men I see retreat, and they know they're screwed. They just want to have some kind of, not lose everything. So they don't assert themselves in their marriage. They don't participate, or not that they don't participate, but they don't assert themselves. They go along with everything in order to avoid being totally destroyed. They understand the power dynamic, and they've their choice in it. We call this a successful marriage. I don't call it a successful marriage. I call it slavery. The guy is retreated and won't assert himself in anything meaningful in the marriage or the family because the risks are too great. And that marriage survives, but is that successful? No, that's slavery.
I mean, I think if you go into a marriage with kind of MGTOW values and you've got your own boundaries and you clearly state them from the outset, then you're much more likely to be able to have a marriage that works for.
We could say the same thing about in the time of slavery. Yeah, if you find a good white slave person and you're a black slave, yeah, you can have a good relationship. You can't get away from the fact that the law gives this total power to one party, and the other party is totally subjected to that power of that other party. That law enters into every domestic relationship, every single one without exclusion, no matter how good the parties are or how trustworthy those parties are. That legal power dynamic is conferred upon every domestic relationship by the state in the same way that the power dynamic was conferred upon black-white relationships during slavery. Obviously, you can't, a woman can't legally go out and publicly whip a man like they could in slavery. It was obviously more extreme. But the power dynamic within the relationship is similar. It shares some similar effects. I don't think we can escape that.
No, we have to change the law as a matter of urgency.
Yeah.
Be a long battle.
I don't see it happening in my lifetime. You know, success along those lines, not in the West. The West is increasingly going in the opposite direction, and this social dynamic is like a giant freighter ship in the ocean. It doesn't stop and turn on a dime. It's going to take probably generations. So I think what we've got to do is teach the boys how to survive this. You know, teach them the reality. Let them make their own choices. They want to go and enter that issue. Okay, but teach them what they're really facing, what the legal power structures are, what are the dynamics that are at play that are unavoidable, because legally that's the culture you live within. They should be aware.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know?
Unfortunately.
And there are ways that I think, creative ways that guys can sort of protect themselves in the against the eventuality of a relationship gone bad and the nuclear button being pushed. You know, guys should have an exit plan. You got to have an exit plan in a situation like this.
Yeah, but I mean, when you've got the weight of the law and the administration of the law all against you, how could you possibly protect yourself?
Well, like when I say an exit plan, I say like this: a place to go that you know, money set aside that nobody else knows about. Because these are things you're going to need to survive if the button is pushed, and because there's no external help out there for you. So if before you enter in these arrangements, guys out there, if you're thinking about it, make sure you have something aside for if the button gets pushed, because when that button gets pushed, the whole world come down on your head. So you better have some place to go and some money to survive with to get you through the emergency phase of it at least. But I think you at the very minimum, you need to be aware of what you're going into. You need to be aware of these laws and how they play out. And before you start. So Elizabeth, on any cheerier notes to end on? Or humorous notes?
I don't know. I mean, that Exeter Boys story would have been the last one, wouldn't it?
The boys story, what?
The Exeter Boys protest in their skirts. That's what we should have kept back.
Yeah, that was a great one. Those boys deserve all the kudos.
The future of MRA.
Sorry?
The future of MRA.
The future of MRA, yeah. It's encouraging because it tells me that the boys are aware that they're being discriminated against, and they've got the guts to do something about it, and they do it in a humorous way. So this is like they struck a perfect note, these young fellas there. Mm-hmm. So kudos to the boys. Get those skirts on in the hot weather, change the rules. Well, thank you very much, Elizabeth, then. Shall we, folks who are listening, next week will probably be about in the evening London time sometime. I don't think we've set a time yet, have we? But we'll be moving to an evening time slot next week. Probably the same day, but it might be a switch of days. We'll get the information out on that. Anything else you want to leave the audience with, Elizabeth?
Not today. No, I'm rushing off to get the kids now.
Okay. All the best to you, and looking forward to talking to you next week as well.
Absolutely. Take care.
Okay. Bye now.